Most people think the Oak Cliff streetcar is just a nice little ride to Bishop Arts, but it's actually much bigger than that. The streetcar is part of the reason that Oak Cliff became Oak Cliff in the first place. Back in the late 1880s, developers were trying to sell land across the Trinity River. The problem was land only feels close if people can actually get to it. So they built a rail line from Dallas to Oak Cliff. And once that happened, everything started to change. The line ran down Jefferson, crossed into the neighborhood, and helped create Oak Cliff's first real commercial center around Jefferson and 10th. Businesses gathered where the people gathered. The tracks helped shape the neighborhood. Then, like in a lot of American cities, the streetcars disappeared. By the 1950s, the rails were gone. But in 2015, the streetcar came back. So when you ride it today, you're not just taking a short trip, you're writing a piece of the story that helped build Oak Cliff in the first place.
Welcome to the Hidden City Podcast. I'm Grant.
And I'm Doug, and we're here to share some of the incredible stories and people from Oak Cliff that you might not know.
We're going to sit down with some of the visionaries, craftsmen, and business owners who have shaped Oak Cliff into what it is today.
Oak Cliff is on the south bank of the Trinity River, a few miles south of downtown Dallas. While technically it was part of Dallas, it was its own city for a long time, and it still has that independent spirit.
We'll dive into the history and the spirit of this place, exploring the different challenges and successes that defined it.
This is The Hidden City, a podcast about the people and the stories that make Oak Cliff extraordinary.
You wouldn't think of the streetcar as something that built the Oak Cliff neighborhood. You might think of it as just a quick, fun ride, a way to get over to Bishop Arts, a small line that runs from downtown into Oak Cliff, maybe a nice little urban amenity, maybe a leftover piece of city planning that feels charming but not especially important. But the streetcar story in Oak Cliff is much bigger than that, because rail was not some later add-on to the neighborhood. In a lot of ways, it helped make the neighborhood real in the first place. When Oak Cliff was first being developed in the late 1880s, its promoters knew they had a problem. The land across the Trinity might look promising, but it felt too far from Dallas. It would be hard to sell. So for the very beginning, transportation was part of the pitch.
That is what makes this such a great Oak Cliff story. This is not just a story of an old transit line. It is a story about how a neighborhood gets connected, how a center of gravity gets created, and how the shape of everyday life starts to form around a set of tracks. The early line ran from Dallas across to the Trinity River and into Oak Cliff along Jefferson Boulevard. It branched towards Spring Lake, later Lake Cliff, and also the 10th Street, where the early commercial centers began to gather. In other words, the streetcar did not just move through Oak Cliff. It helped decide where Oak Cliff would gather, where people would shop, and where businesses would want to be.
And if you've ridden on the streetcar today, you have stepped into the return of that much older story. Because the line opened again in 2015 and expanded in 2016 is not just a modern downtown connector. It is the very reappearance of a very old idea that crossing the river changes what is possible. And that connection is one of the main things that turns land into a neighborhood and a neighborhood into part of the city.
Today we want to tell the story of the Oak Cliff streetcar, how developers used this rail to sell Oak Cliff in the first place, how the early line helped shape the neighborhood's first commercial heart, how streetcars became part of a larger Dallas network, how the tracks disappeared, and how after decades the streetcar came back across the river.
To understand why the Oak Cliff streetcar mattered so much, you have to begin with geography. In the 1880s, the land south of downtown Dallas was not simply right there. It was separated by the Trinity River and by the trouble of getting across it. A place can be physically near and still feel far away if it takes too much effort to reach. That was the challenge for the early developers of Oak Cliff. If they wanted people to buy lots, build houses, and imagine a future there, they had to solve the problem of distance.
And they understood that pretty clearly. Transportation was not treated as some later improvement. It was part of the product from the beginning. And in early 1887, Oak Cliff developers organized the Dallas and Oak Cliff Elevated Railway Company. Their goal was not simply to make travel easier. It was to make Oak Cliff feel close enough to be worth investing in.
They were not waiting for the neighborhood to grow and then deciding it needed rail. They were using rail to help create the neighborhood before it fully existed. Buyers were promised streetcar access, sometimes before streets even existed in reality. That tells you a lot. The tracks were not just a convenience, they were proof of possibility, a way of saying this place is connected. this place is viable. This place is part of the city.
And that is how Oak Cliff was being sold, not just as land across the river, but as land you could actually get to. The early route was pretty direct, but it carried a lot of weight. The line ran from the Commerce to Jefferson in Dallas, across the Trinity River, and then continued along Jefferson Avenue into Oak Cliff. From there, it branched. One branch ran towards Spring Lake, which later became Lake Cliff. The other continued up Jefferson and ended up at 10th Street, which became one of the earliest commercial districts in Oak Cliff. There were small passenger stations along the route, and the main ticket station sat in the 100 block of Jefferson.
This was not an abstract transportation idea floating over a map. It was a specific line moving people through specific places, and those places started to change because of it. The end of the line near Jefferson and 10th became a kind of magnet. Businesses gravitated there because people were arriving there. The terminus helped establish the early commercial center of Oak Cliff, and by 1905, there were as many as 20 brick business houses near this intersection. That's a great example of what infrastructure actually does to a neighborhood. It creates habits, and then commerce follows those habits.
So when we talk about the streetcar building Oak Cliff, that is not just poetic language. That line helped determine where people gathered. It shaped land value, it shaped shopping patterns, and it gave Jefferson and 10th a kind of momentum. The track was doing more than moving passengers. It was helping neighbors decide where its front doors would be.
The first version of the Oak Cliff line was steam-powered. That makes sense for the era, but it was not the final form. By 1894, the steam-powered engines into Oak Cliff were abandoned in favor of electricity. So even early on, the system was evolving with the times. What started as a steam-powered connection became part of the electric streetcar age.
And once the line shifted to electricity, it started looking more like the kind of streetcar network people imagine when they think of the early 20th century cities. By 1904, the report described a completed loop in Oak Cliff running along Jefferson Avenue, Tyler Street, 7th Street, and Bishop. That is important because it shows that the system is doing more than just carrying people over from Dallas. It was also tying different parts of Oak Cliff together.
At first, the rail line helps Oak Cliff become connected to Dallas. Then over time, it also helps Oak Cliff become more connected to itself. A loop route means repeatability. It means people start to understand the neighborhood through a transportation pattern. You know where the line goes. You know where people are getting on and off. You know which streets are active, and because of that, the city starts to take a more durable shape.
Dallas had multiple different companies operating streetcar lines, and that over time, they were merged into a more unified system. Oak Cliff's line remained independent until 1919, when Dallas voters approved consolidation of Oak Cliff and other private lines into what became the Dallas Railway Company.
One thing I like about this story is that it helps explain something bigger than just transportation. Streetcars do not just shorten travel time, they make certain kinds of life possible. In Oak Cliff, the streetcar helped determine where people worked, where they shopped, where business clustered, and how people moved between the neighborhoods and downtown. The early commercial center around Jefferson and 10th did not happen by accident. It grew where the line terminated and where people naturally gathered.
Marsalis, the early Oak Cliff promoter, gave free rides on the streetcar to entice Dallas residents to come visit Oak Cliff. That is such a clear real estate strategy. Let the people experience the ride, let them see how easy it feels, and then suddenly the neighborhood seems more plausible to them. It is basically the 19th century version of saying, come see the development for yourself.
And if you think about that for a second, it really gets at the heart of this whole thing. The ride itself was part of the sales pitch, not just the destination, but the trip. Cross the river, arrive in Oak Cliff, see the new streets, see the activity, imagine yourself living there. This is how transit and development were working together in the early days of Oak Cliff.
Connection was never distributed evenly. The transit world of that era also reflected the social structure in its time, including segregation. So even when the rails physically linked parts of the city, it did not erase the inequalities built into the everyday life. That matters because getting connected has never meant the same thing for everybody.
Like a lot of American cities, Dallas eventually began to move away from the streetcars. And the shift was not just technological, it was political and cultural too. A comparative transit study showing that after World War II, Dallas Railway and Terminal began a rail modernization effort at a time when ridership was still very large. But the company had to agree to eliminate all rail lines as a condition for getting a needed fare increase. That is one of the most striking details in the whole story. A fare increase came tied to the eventual removal of rail.
That really changes how you hear the story, because it's not simply that people woke up one day and the streetcar had become obsolete. There were still millions of riders. System-wide ridership fell from 91 million in 1948 to 73.5 million in 1954. And by 1957, all rail lines were gone. That is a decline, but it is not nothing. A lot of people were still using the system as it disappeared.
And in local memory, the Oak Cliff route remained one of the most emotionally significant parts of that ending. Think about the Sunset Hampton line. In the early hours of January 15, 1956, a streetcar crossed the Trinity River Viaduct from Oak Cliff into downtown in what became an end of an era moment. One last ride, one more crossing, then the tracks were done.
And once the tracks were gone, the city started to imagine movement differently. More buses, more cars, more highways, a different understanding of what modern transportation should look like. The streetcar did not just vanish physically, its logic started to disappear too.
Then, after decades, the idea came back. The Oak Cliff streetcar was supported by federal Tiger funding, including a $23 million award in 2010. Construction began in 2013. Phase 1 opened on April 13, 2015, and the extension into Bishop Arts opened on August 27, 2016. The line is owned by the city of Dallas and operated and maintained by DART.
And what is interesting is that the modern pitch was not all different from the original one. The planning documents framed the line as a way to connect Oak Cliff neighborhoods to downtown and to the broader region. The application emphasized that North Oak Cliff was not served by DART light rail and that the streetcar would provide a critical link. So once again, the story is about making a connection possible.
The modern line crosses the Houston Street Viaduct using off-wire battery capability so that the city would not have to install overhead catenary on the historic bridge. In other words, the new streetcar uses modern technology to make an old crossing work again without compromising the historic structure. That is a nice way of putting old and new together in the same project.
And the line itself is short but pretty clear. It runs 2.45 miles between the EBJ Union Station and the Bishop Arts District with 6 stops. Union Station, Greenbrier, Oakenwald, Beckley, 6th Street, and then Bishop Arts. That may not sound big, but it is not really trying to be that big. It is trying to do something specific. It is trying to stitch together a boundary that has mattered for a long time.
Today, the Oak Cliff streetcar sits in an interesting place. On one hand, it is a real transit line with real riders, real service hours, and real operating costs. On the other hand, because it is visible and fixed and symbolic, it also ends up carrying a lot of debate about what kind of city Dallas wants to be. In 2024, the Dallas City Council approved more than $1.8 million in payments to DART for operation of the system. While some council members raised concerns about the funding and reliability, that is part of the current story too.
And that makes sense. Streetcars are visible in a way businesses often are not. They feel intentional. They feel like placemaking. Because of that, they can become lightning rods for disagreement. People see rails and pavement and start asking bigger questions about money, priorities, development, and who the line really is for.
And once you know the older history, the ride feels a little different. And maybe the biggest takeaway is just this. The streetcar did not merely serve Oak Cliff. It helped shape this whole area. It helped decide where people gathered. It's where commerce took root. It's how neighborhoods started to understand their relationship to Dallas. And when you ride it now, you are not just taking a short trip to Bishop Arts or downtown. You are stepping into a much older argument about connection, distance, and what it takes for a neighborhood to become part of a city.
Dude, Oak Cliff streetcar.
There's a lot
awesome.
of interesting history in there.
Yeah.
I kind of love that it is as symbolic as it is functional.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I do feel like I think of great cities in like San Francisco.
I always think of San Francisco,
is that, but
Yeah.
the like that imagery feels very city, American city. Like maybe it's international too, but like there's something about it that feels like, oh, this is a real city, and I like that. So the romantic in me loves that, but man, I do like, I see these images, and I know we're going to put these up in the episode, but like, just it going down a corridor and people jumping on and off Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually like, it's very inspiring to what can be for the streetcar too.
You can have a little taste of San Francisco, and in fact, that's what Jefferson Boulevard was with the streetcar, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I like sad I didn't get to see that.
Yeah, well, and it's my understanding is there's a whole second phase to this that the streetcar will go over to the Halpern Park.
That's
kind of my understanding, but which would be cool. But
yeah, we need to talk to Chad and see what he
probably knows all of it.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do think like the whole, if there's an ability for it to go up and down Jefferson, I just would bring such a different connected thing back that I don't, the idea of jumping on, going down, and then jumping off, and some of the spots feels pretty special. And
what I find really interesting is it is like they put the streetcar lines down and then businesses grew around it. Mm-hmm. The inverse is true. You take the streetcar lines away, those areas of commerce and even the terminus where the end of the streetcar line was suddenly aren't as significant culturally or even commerce-wise as they once were.
Yeah.
That the terminus of Jefferson and 10th used to be like kind of like sort of the center of Oak Cliff in some ways, kind of the main street area. Was there anything about that episode that you found interesting?
I think like transit, obviously, okay, Tyler Station is at a DART line. And so it's a stop. So I think of like the modern equivalent is like potentially like a Tyler Station type thing where it's like, so where Wax Base and the brewery is, and it's
totally, we
love the interconnectedness of that. And so it's Oak Cliff centric. It's all Dallas centric with the DART line. But I love that like business still grows next to those types of spots. And so
that's cool.
I thought about that. What about you? Was there anything that jumped out to you?
Man, I was blown away by the fact that there was, what was it, like 75 million riders, and like 4 years later it was gone. Like I kind of want to dig into that history more, because that sounds to me very intentional in the terms of like, it's no longer not that it's in demand, it's like the world is changing and we're making this decision. And you think about the rise of vehicles and cars after that, but to me that was like, that's how everybody got around, sort of, or at least that was a big portion of it. It's really interesting.
I do think there's like the design of a neighborhood is interesting, because you can kind of see, I mean, the greatest example is like Bishop Arts, right?
Yeah.
Like it used to be a streetcar stop, and now it's like been built in a way that is less car centric, and feels more neighborhood like driven with like these centers, like and so I think we're the recipients of a pretty awesome heritage in that sense. Where it doesn't feel like a suburb out in, I don't know, somewhere else that's been so planned all around car. So there's a part of me that's like, if a place could have a streetcar come back in a way, be really cool to see something like that.
I agree, man. I used to live downtown, as you know, and got to take the DART quite a bit to and from. And there is something really special about taking the train across the Trinity into Oak Cliff. Awesome. It's a great experience. And you get a sense of what that was like for the people using the streetcar back in the day. That like, it truly is a distance. You've got to cross a chasm to get to Oak Cliff, but also it took 10 minutes. It wasn't like it wasn't inaccessible. So I think about that. I also am just like so happy that they brought the streetcar back. Like, what a absolute miracle effort.
North Oak Cliff Transit Authority or something. They like made up. It was Jason and a few others. I know Jason gets a lot of the credit, and credit to Jason. But I think there's a group in North Oak Cliff that
Chad
really
deeply
pushed. Bo, I thought was maybe part of it. I don't know. There's a group of them, but
it's cool. It's there.
Yeah.
It's back and it's operating. I need to go ride it. I haven't used it nearly enough. I've been on a few times, but it's a cool little part of our history. Awesome. So anyways, thanks for joining the show today, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Hidden City. We hope you discovered something about Oak Cliff that you didn't know. If you enjoyed the show, I hope you subscribe to it on YouTube and then follow us on any of the podcasting platforms. Also, if you enjoyed it, please share with a friend, and thanks so much for tuning in.